Zack Cahill, welcome to Chewing It Over. What on earth are you talking about menopause for?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. Not because I'm going through it or I'm likely to. It is a
Okay.
funny one, isn't it? Like I've considered this. I don't know, maybe it's a very 2023 problem to think that, you have to consider the speaker. You can't take the information on its own value. But I kind of get it, It's a very it's very personal, very subjective thing that people go through. It's very complex. And I would get the urge to go, look, well, what do you know about it? But what I know about it is, I've been training people for, I mean, near enough 20 years, and you see patterns. And, there's a reason that all these challenges are, I want 10 men over 40 who want to change their body, as if a man being over 40 is any sort of disadvantage, as if you're not still basically in the prime of your life. But there's no one going, I want 10 women over 50 who, have hot flushes constantly and feel like they're doing everything right, but still are gaining weight. I saw this pattern, and I see it with my colleagues all the time. And it's a bad habit of personal trainers to kind of blame the client, and I always try not to do that. I always try and dig a little deeper and try and blame myself, try and ask the question of, okay, well, what do I need to do to get this person where they want to be? I never want to be going, wow, she's just not working hard enough. And the people who are the most complex, the most unpredictable in terms of their progress, it's always women in perimenopause and menopause. And I just got really obsessed with that. And I got really interested in reading into it, but boiling that down into the simplest possible system that doesn't go outside of my remit as a trainer. What I'm not here to sell pills that claim to manipulate your hormones. What you see a lot of time.
that would have been. I'd never thought of that, but yeah, when
Yeah,
when I was thinking about how it'd be great to have a chat with you on air about this, it would have been hilarious if I'd have pressed refresh and it was actually
yeah,
you peddling some supplement you've just done a brand deal with or something. But
yeah.
no, I asked that question, of course, tongue in cheek, because I think you're well within. I'm really pleased that you are, and it was really nice to see the contrast with your seminar that you did for your local community on such a topic, when the personal trainers are sometimes doing seminars, but it would be on adding bulk for the late teen,
Yeah.
rather than it being or early 20s. And so it does beg the question, though, like, you're glutton for punishment in lots of ways. For one of them you've already mentioned is that you've got the challenge that will come to what the hell do you know, and is that not a bit of a sensitive topic to be talking about, which we can unpack a little bit more, but I think you've answered that. You know me enough to know that that's far from the spirit of my question, being bothered about that. But the second piece is then, why would you choose something that would be so challenging and to some extent beyond a typical scope of a personal trainer, or what would be narrowly considered under stereotypes to be? So take either of them where you wish, really, but that was kind of the spirit of it, my question.
Yeah, I mean, my personal reason is I've always had a good mix of male and female clients, and I've always got on really well with female clients. And I do think you broadly have different approaches with male and female clients, and they face different difficulties. Men are wanting to lift heavy and then rest for ages. Women are wanting to chase the sweat and the pump, and making these observations of the kind of differences between those populations has always been interesting to me. And then just seeing that pattern of these women who actually have been diligent and have been training for a long time, because the women coming into menopause now are just about the generation who did start weight training. They used to be, when I started this, you would have the women coming into the gym, well, I don't want to get big and bulky. We're past that now, and they don't say that anymore. So it's
Right.
now the women, entering their mid to late 40s. These are women who kind of where the beginning of weight training is actually a good thing for women. So in some ways they've been doing a lot right. They know more about nutrition now than any other population coming into the gym ever have, and yet they're not getting the results.
Right.
So it is different too. Okay, you just, what, you need to get your steps up. Maybe eat a salad now and then, cut back on the desserts or whatever. These people are actually fairly well informed, and they're pretty diligent, and they're pretty hardworking, and yet they have that frustration. And I've always found that interesting as a trainer. 80% of the information works for 80% of the people. What about those 20%? And I've always been drawn to those 20%, you know.
Mm.
And then, I mean, from a business perspective, like this is half of the population who are massively underserved, like who are being done a huge disservice. And all of the
Yeah.
trends in fitness, you know, fitness industry, which is such a sort of broken industry anyway, all of the trends are, you know, aimed towards men, and the research of the trendy stuff is done on men, all the fasting and everything, you know. So they're just being done a massive disservice. So there's both that personal interest. I get very obsessive about things, and I'll just go down a rabbit hole on something for like 2 years, and this is just one of many rabbit
Yeah.
holes I've sort of gone down. But it happens to really align with a hungry audience of people who are very, you know, they really want a result. They're willing to do the work, but they're not being given the information.
And you feel that's definitely such an interesting crossover to exactly what I've experienced as well in when I've thought in that direction, and fortunately had the opportunity to then give platform to various experts in the women's health and pelvic health field, and also at several seminars that we've put on by medical experts in the field of menopause and stuff. And so that one of the reasons for why it struck my interest that you were cracking on in that direction and helping to translate that for your audience. I think one of the things that seems to correlate as well is that the amount of blame that they will sometimes pile upon themselves, or the responsibility that they are narrowly assuming, and that is a very biopsychosocial issue where all sorts of things that are contributing to why that is. But the moments that the pennies that drop when someone, in our context, let's say for me in terms of pain and injury, and for you in terms of training and conditioning, the ability to just say, like, there are things here that are not just on you to try and solve. Like that, there are things that we can collaborate on. There are things that I might know that might help to contribute to this, and just the amount of you see just the load just lessen from their shoulders sometimes even immediately, because they have felt this pressure and obligation that they've just got to trust the process, eat less, move more, and that's the only thing that they need to do, and it's all to do with calorie counting, or and they've not really had the opportunity to comprehend their own body well enough to really understand the nuances. And so I love that you're thinking like that, and I love that this is an opportunity for me to understand how some of the material of which and some of the understanding I've gained in recent years you are applying to that, your market, your angle, your, because of course some of your clients are of course injured, and that our markets naturally intersect, but it is a relevantly different specialism. So what are the key areas that you felt in your recent seminar that you decided to explore, beyond sort of, maybe if you want to go into anything diagnostically, then fine, but I mean in terms of what are the key components that you want your menopausal clients to be considering, and how are you helping them through them?
Well, you kind of hit on a big thing there, which is the pressure that they put on themselves. And that's true not just in terms of training, the whole calories in, calories out, you know, while sure accurate, but it can send you down this ever narrowing path of, oh, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not punishing myself hard enough.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of what it translates to. But that's across the board, because what you'll find with a lot of these clients is they come last, right? The job comes first, the kids come first, the husbands come first, and they come a distant last. And the male clients that I have who are that age, they have a certain, I've observed, generalizing, they'll have a certain point where they go, no, now it's time for me. I've done the work, I've done the family. This is time for me now, and they will give themselves over to like a 6-month process of like changing their body. It seems that women have they struggle to give that, you know, to give that time to themselves, to prioritize themselves. And so a lot of what I do initially is just going, okay, you've got to just, this is for you. This is not about punishing you. This is not because you've done something wrong or you're not doing enough, you're not working hard enough. This is something that is positive that you're doing for yourself. You know, it's how you're framing it, because that all leads into stress. And stress is just such a huge, and how you respond to stress is a huge thing for anyone at any point in your life. It's like almost annoying, right? Like I'm sure you have it with any physical conditions people have. It's like stress. Yeah, I know. What do I do about it? So I try and talk about that, but not in a way that just becomes like super overwhelming, you know? But because yes, like again, it's a factor of menopause is cortisol, you know, our stress hormone, becoming really, really elevated. So you've got to find a way to create, you know, I don't know, I'm kind of conscious of using like the kind of the terms like parasympathetic drive and all this kind of stuff, but I basically want to someone to build in a plan of recovery. You know, you can talk about cortisol, recovery, paracetamol, but really that's all you're talking about. You're talking about recovery. You're talking about trying to reduce the stress or improve your resilience to stress, because stress is an inevitable part of life. So, I mean, I try and cover that with people. But that is about basically the stories that you tell them. It's about the stories that they're telling themselves. I mean, that's kind of the primary thing. You know, if you can change the story that you're telling yourself about your weight, or about how you're eating, about your exercise, I mean, that's like one of the biggest things. Forget about journaling in the morning or getting up and looking at the sun. You know, it's really the story that you're telling yourself in your head all the time. That's the most important factor.
That's a really good point about the pressure and exposure that they are. The broader expectation, and it's always a really interesting sort of socio-cultural point about where that pressure and where that expectation is coming from, how much of that is from within, how much of that is from without, and of course these things intersect and are unique to each individual, but it's just that then your point there where they struggle to naturally delegate sometimes enough to really protect that time, and without feeling then guilty about it, again, for various internal and external reasons. What are let's hone in on the recovery point then, because that definitely, you know, rings true with regards to the management of injuries, namely sort of tendon injuries that can occur, that can be really related to menopause, is that the failure to adequately recover, to get a failure of rehab dosage. And so I can so imagine that applying to Dom's recovery as it needs to for training recovery. So give me some insights into how you might program differently once they're on board, once they're giving themselves that permission, once they're realizing that they're not selfish to protect that time. How are you training them and programming them differently?
So a message, a kind of bite-sized message I try and get across, is to polarize the intensity of the training, because a lot of training lives in the middle, right? A lot of classes would be moderate, sort of middle intensity. Almost any fitness class you can think of lives there. Okay, and that is probably the least bang for your buck and the most stressful on the body. It doesn't mean that if you enjoy it, you shouldn't do it. It doesn't mean it's wrong for everybody. It means that if you've been living there and seeing diminishing returns, then you're probably going to benefit from polarizing the training, by which I mean having high intensity training, which would be heavier weight training, actual strength training, a little bit of perhaps interval training, like very sparingly across the week, and then lower intensity training that you could almost call recovery work. So stuff like swimming and walking and stuff like that, but not a lot of pounding the pavement. And the biggest bang for your buck you're going to get is from strength training. But like strength training is a specific thing, right? That isn't 20 rep body weight squats. It isn't big circuits. It's not a body pump class, right? It's over 80% of your 1 rep max, you know, low reps, heavy weights with long rest periods. But most people are not trained enough to go right into that. You know, it's you see with women with the fiber type kind of predisposition, they'll get 12 reps with something. You want to bring them to failure at about 6 reps, let's say, to do true strength training. You increase it a tiny amount and they can't get 1 rep. And that's because of a lack of intramuscular coordination. It's, you know, about slow twitch fibers and all this kind of thing. So that person,
and often the form breaking down as well.
That form breaking down.
That they've done body weight squats or studio bar squats for such a long time that it doesn't translate necessarily to something heavier on your back. So I get it.
They've got to go through a period of training to train. You know, you're not going right in there with those like 6 reps. You're probably going 8 to 10, and you know, classic periodization sort of stuff. But the big gap, like we get the incentives in the fitness industry are so backwards that we have to make everything sound really complex and proprietary, and we start talking about, you know, manipulate your hormones with this and that. And really, if you're talking about training, execution is incredibly poor. If you go into any gym in the world, I think 80% of the reps, I'm, you know, picking a number out of the air, but a high number of the reps being performed there are virtually wasted. People don't know how to do the basics well. And you must see this with physiotherapy. The amount of time I've had someone come to me who's been to their physio and they say, yeah, I'm doing my rotator cuff, and they show me external rotations with a band where there is no rotation at the shoulder. It's just elbow extension. So they've been doing some nice little tricep extensions. They're executing that exercise completely wrong. whether that was how it was shown to them or how they've taken it on board. The execution of your exercises across the board is terrible, and that's obviously
Yeah,
not
you
specific
do.
to
It's
go.
not specific to menopause. Sorry, you were going to say. Yeah, and I agree. I think what I find really interesting and really what pains me is the geography between us, right? We're not local to each other. We know each other through different means, but it's one of the reasons why, as a sort of thinker in this space, you really are one of my favorites, regardless of my biases, is that you are being considerate to the gray areas and applying it and tailoring it to that individual. You're not averse, though, because sometimes people can do that, but that means that they just cannot produce content that has an appropriate caveat to it not being personalized, and they can't allow themselves to just broadly generalize with the appropriate caveats. So they end up being either completely personalized, therefore I can't say anything general, or they overgeneralize in such a way that then ends up being a catch-all, and they start selling. That's where they do get sucked into products or services or narrow, like download this plan, and it's not appropriately tailored. So you get that middle ground really sensible, and I love to see you then applying it to menopause. Where do you think, though, the is there a threshold that's really obvious for you, or is it more of a gray area where you might then have that client go and pursue a more medical conversation? Like, do you find that these things it's more likely to blur a line between sort of health and fitness than say a otherwise 20-some bodybuilder? It just kind of is,
Of course.
leaving the ped use to one side. But I'm just meaning that, generally speaking, that's one of the reasons for the spirit of my question being about bravery, or about the fact that it's a bolder move you're doing it, is because so many personal trainers are totally too standoffish of such factors. How do you manage that part of the conversation?
You specifically, sorry, which part of it exactly?
I mean the potential crossover to health.
Oh,
guess,
yeah.
Or medical, making sure that then they're appropriately seeking the right advice medically.
I mean, I generally speaking advise them to, if they can, speak to someone. I'm not an expert on HRT. I do think it can be transformative, but it's well beyond my remit. I do use, there's an Australian questionnaire. I think if you put into Google Australian menopause questionnaire, it's a 15-point score questionnaire. They give them a 0, 1, or 2, or 3 based on the severity of their symptoms. If they're over 15, they're a candidate for HRT, and that's something that we'll do regularly. We'll follow that, do that questionnaire like sort of 4 to 6 weeks, just to kind of check in and see where they are with their symptoms, whether they're on HRT or not. But I mean, HRT can be, if it's the thing that you need, it really, really works.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that seems sensible, and using validated outcomes is definitely one way of doing that. Do you have any top tips for a lot of people? They just avoid the conversation. Let's be fair. It's something that it's borderline a crime in my game to avoid the conversation, right? That's your job. Like it might be awkward, it might be uncomfortable, might be taboo, might go wrong, but tough shit. You've got to ask those questions. They are medically important. So but there is a plentiful version of personal training where it's not fundamentally neglect. It's just that, generally speaking, people hide from that. And part of the reason they hide from that is because it can sometimes be awkward. It can feel inappropriate, or the sex difference between you and the patient can be different. In that, what the hell would you be asking about that, or what would you know about that? So, do you have any top tips for people that are willing to puff the chest out and be a little bit braver and decide to engage in those conversations without it becoming awkward?
Yeah, I would stop trying to be didactic and think that you need to have the answer for them. I think trainers feel scared that, this is outside of my area, so I'm not going to have that snappy answer that makes me look clever. And really what the client actually wants is someone to ask questions, ask questions and be interested in the answer. And I changed that a few years ago. I really learned that, and I really internalized that. And the difference that makes with clients is like pretty dramatic. And it is just like, you sit down and you go, okay, so what's the thing that's bothering you? And you listen, and they might not have spoken out loud about this thing to anybody. Certainly not someone in like a sort of professional capacity, where they don't feel like they're burdening them, because that's actually your job now. Your job is to talk about this stuff. And it is just, you just get them to provide an answer, and it might end up with, do you think that's something you'd be better off speaking to a doctor about? They say yes, and you say, well, when are you going to do that? When are you going to make that? You kind of maybe hold them accountable to it a little bit, but not thinking that you can provide the answer, because you can't. I think it is your responsibility as a trainer to be as educated as possible about this stuff. If this is a population that you want to serve, but you also do not want to make the mistake so many trainers make, and just thinking that they have to be the font of all knowledge, right? You got to stay within your remit. What do you actually do? You do exercise, and you do nutrition, and you do lifestyle stuff. Okay, but there is a point where they need to speak to someone in the medical profession. You shouldn't get in the way of that.
Do you think? Do you have a particularly sort of favorite line of how you introduce it? For example, I'll admit one of mine. It's within my assessment. It's such an obvious. It doesn't feel like a tangent. It's just like, where are you up to in terms of your menopause status? If there is a particular window in sex, it's appropriate to ask that question. That's an easier question for me to ask amongst my other questions about their medical health. Yeah. Do you have a similar sort of way in?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, because I guess they're coming to me now. And that happened so kind of organically that I barely noticed it. But it was more of that's the thing that they bring up to me. You know what I mean?
Yes, of course. That's kind of why they're there. Yeah. So I suppose I would just let's imagine that wasn't then, for the spirit of the sake of this question, for those that aren't getting known in that space, that we're trying to inspire other personal trainers to lean in. Yes. If they've got a profile of patient of which it would be appropriate, do you have any angles of which you might recommend that they would?
I think the one you've said is a good thing. You can ask them about, like, how do you feel with your fitness at the moment? Have you noticed any changes? Have you noticed any changes in your response to exercise? That to be honest, they just want an opening if they want to talk about it. You know what I mean? If they want to talk to you about it, you don't have to drag it out of them. You just have to give them an opening.
Yeah.
And it depends if they might not be coming to you for that, though, right? I mean, so it's such a broad industry. Sometimes your client will come to you and they want you as an exercise delivery system. I'm just in it for a long time, and I've just it's a sort of an area that I've kind of cultivated. So by the time they come to me, they want to talk about it, and they kind of know that I'm going to be responsive and I'm going to be interested in it. But so it's tricky, I suppose, because I'm kind of doing it for so long. But to put myself, because I guess I was just always curious, and I just always did try and seek to be just ask open-ended questions and be genuinely interested in my clients' lives. And I think trainers should all have that. If you want to achieve anything, it doesn't end when the client leaves the gym floor. And then you forget about their existence until they see you at their next appointment on Thursday or whatever. Ask about their lives and try and, if you can, just reach those little fingers into their lives as much as they will let you. And then that builds trust.
And that way in which you've been able to develop professionally to be a trusted advisor and a coach rather than just a rep counter and a exercise delivery mechanism, which is sometimes the entrance and introduction, but you have cultivated that. Has that been just the evolution and wisdom that comes with time, or has that been really quite purposeful for you as a professional? Because I know that that's the aspiration of many a trainer, but they find it to be such a challenging journey.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit of both. It is just the natural outcome of having been doing, like, this is a young industry, right? There's a high churn. The fact that I've been doing it for like 20 years, I am ancient in the fitness industry. So part of it is just experience, but it is also
most people grown out of it by now. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. Got a proper
job. Nice. No, I like that.
So, but it's also just purposeful because it's just my interest. It's an interest in people and a curiosity about people. I would hope people go into the caring professions, would have this kind of interest in people, generally speaking, right?
Well, that's what I agree with you, but I think that there is a risk that you can't help but project, because that's you. I think that even your definition of personal training within the care professions is an interesting lens that I know that you feel like, and I know that you apply that in everything you're about in your life. but that's not necessarily, people have a fair church and state separation between health and fitness sometimes, or that they wouldn't consider it within the care professions, and they would consider it within sport and performance, and being your best functional self you can be. They wouldn't necessarily see that as a role, and so that those sensible sort of soft skills, life coach type, and being a trusted advisor is something that I think you've naturally answered the question as to it has come naturally to you, probably by disposition, as well as an understanding of how you can get the most impact in people's lives, which is what fundamentally they're asking for, rather than it being that that transformation is on a muscular level. It really is about a few pennies dropping, and for them to be able to sustain progress, and anything that they might attribute to your care is all for the good, and definitely why it's much more of a natural conduit between us than it would be between me and other trainers that do a decent job in the bodybuilding gyms, but fundamentally are not seeing people in their fullest, and are over isolating, and sometimes getting some more short-term results. While I've got you, I can't help but ask you about what you feel the sort of general state of the relations are between, say, trainers and physios. The overdone sometimes stereotypes still do exist, whereby physios aren't the friends of personal trainers because they're always telling people to take it easier or over rest. And I've been frustrated by my industry to that effect. And then there's other sides where physios don't sometimes like trainers for sometimes cutting against their expertise, and sometimes physios sometimes have a superiority complex. But then there are other times where trainers will go too far against the grain and be overreaching into their territory. So that's the sort of cliche. But which parts of that do you think still play out, and where do you feel, are we trending positive or trending negative?
Yeah, I mean, I think the personal training industry is moving out of a trend towards kind of pathologizing everything and essentially trying to be physiotherapists as well, which was probably peaked around the early 2010s. We're very trend based, and we're almost always overreacting or underreacting to some particular trend, and you'll remember when everything was on wobble boards and Swiss balls and it was all that sort of the whole pull check thing. And I think personal trainers naturally have a little bit of a chip on the shoulder because you haven't gone through a traditional academic process, right? Like you don't really have the garland of like a legitimate like degree or something a lot of the time, what I mean? So I think there's been a little bit of an insecurity pressure to go, well, I know better than that physio just told him to do this, and actually he came to me and and he was fine, but I think we're maybe moving away from that, where we're always looking for dysfunctions. I mean, that was a real watchword when I was kind of getting into the industry. It's like, oh, look at this guy's squat. Oh, he's got a tight adductor, and he's whatever pronating and all this kind of thing. I think we're thankfully moving away from that. And so I think because of that, I've seen a little bit more of an openness to try and refer. And just referring is just obviously the smart thing to do. It's obviously the smart thing to do. It's only going to help you. And I think what I would say to trainers the same as physiotherapists, like, find the good people in your area and do a session with them and build that network of trust. And then don't generalize by, oh, physios are like this. Go, I've got a good physio. Because just the same as trainers, there's terrible trainers and there's great trainers, and it will only kind of help us. I think I see more openness to that now, because maybe there's a little bit less pressure for us to basically act like physiotherapists,
That's really good to hear. I think I hadn't thought of it that way, but the way in which there is a changing of trend, let's say, in the personal training game, means that it's a more accessible relationship. When it was, to be honest, I think it was an excessive physio influence on the training game for a time. I mean, my favorite nemesis over the pond, Kelly Starrett, is one of the people that definitely I think negatively contributed that. I'm not putting it all on him, but him and several others, that fair play to their influence. Obviously I disagree profoundly with them clinically, but one of the things that it did is it made sort of tin pot poor therapists out of a lot of trainers that made everything far more specific. And so a trend towards broader functional movements at least pulls us away from that pathologizing, where I think that there is a risk, and I want to try and mitigate it within my side of the industry, is that as physios start to improve their comprehension over strength and conditioning and start realizing that that's the center of the bullseye is functional rehabilitation, and that they need to be doing less with their hands and machines and their strapping and their braces, means
Yeah.
that then we could, if we're not careful, end up having the risk on the other side. So because we're getting more into your space, that we start then being relative amateurs to some people that haven't been
Yeah.
very rehab centered, thinking that because they come with said degree and qualification, which isn't in strength and conditioning, and they are relatively inexperienced in that space, that they start to, you know, not make the mistakes of over, not necessarily over encroaching, but failing to give due respect to those that have more experience in that space. And so we need to not make the mistake on the other foot that you were describing from those years ago. And I see that being well moderated in the quality ones, but fads and trends exist everywhere, and I think that there's a lifting heavy strength and conditioning type trend that can sort of be potentially lurching a little bit in our game. And I think that I hope that conversations like this one, which is with, you know, between a physio and a personal trainer, but about, in the main, this conversation's been about something that is certainly far from sort of grunts and sets and reps. It's definitely something that good quality trainers and good quality therapists will be seeing people in the round and meeting them where they are with their own health and fitness journey, and that we have different roles in that, but collaborating is just the key thing, and that the cross competition is just bizarre. In fact, I can't think of an example within the last few years of which a patient has ever felt genuinely in a situation where they would only be a customer of one or the other. Like that's because that's the sort of insecurity that can exist in either tribe in a way, is that they're only going to work with a therapist, or they're going to work with a trainer, and therefore the cross competition like there would be between two people working on the same case. And I cannot think of an example. It's such a weird fear for anyone to have. I don't know if you forgive me if you feel that is a thing that happens to you more regularly than it does to me.
No, I completely agree. There is no downside, and we should reach into it. Even, I mean, the physiotherapists are surprised when I email them and say, "Oh, I see you've been working with so and so client," and then I want to have a conversation with them about that client, because obviously there's the Chinese whispers that will happen between the client, the physio, and me, and I'd rather speak with them directly. But no one does that. Trainers don't do that. You know,
and that guts me, but I'm not surprised that I agree that they are surprised, and trainers are sometimes like, I stop them over thanking me sometimes, and vice versa sometimes, I'm sure. But it's like because I know that I'm refreshed when I'm contacted, and maybe I'm at risk of going, thank you so much again for ringing, and it shouldn't be so novel, but it so often is. It's like and that is a shame. That is a cultural shift that we need to make. I think that's just an interprofessional like courtesy that needs to start becoming. We're all reaping the rewards. Anyone that's doing that is reaping the rewards. The basic biomechanical adjustments that are often being suggested from like, oh, people ask me all the time, should I really be squatting at the moment? It's like, well, it depends. And here's an example, or a set of examples of squats that would probably be smart for this knee right now, and here's a few that you probably shouldn't be doing. And that is not a fair thing for me to put on them if they're working with a trainer. If they then are trying to write all that down, or trying to remember what I'd said, what were the do's and don'ts and stuff, and instead I'm often saying, well, who should I speak to about this? Who is it you're working with? And we I think we do it more comfortably with PE teachers if we need to on the pediatric side. We'll do it more with sports coaches, particularly. I think that liaison's been more comfortable between physios and their sort of sporting coaches. But when it comes to conditioning and trainers and stuff, it's sometimes I think there is still a bit of standoffishness there, which we need to keep improving.
There is. I mean, the person training again. The fitness industry is such a strange wild west. It's just it's a strange place that it would be great to see it moved more towards seeing yourself, as a professional that is trying to help get this person working, as best you can, and and it's just I don't know what to say. It's just a strange little industry. It kind of baffles me a little bit sometimes, but.
One for another day, but I suppose I don't actually know your opinion on that direction, and I won't. It'd be too much of a tangent we have time for now. Would you aspire to a professionalization and appropriate regulation of the fitness industry in such a way that you think, and would that improve things?
Perhaps it sort of exists and it sort of doesn't. I mean, you can just work. You can work as a personal trainer if you just are insured, and you don't need a qualification to become insured. There are reps, and the level 1, level 2, level 3 reps system. And I think to go and work in a gym, they will check that. But I mean, in my life have never been asked for qualifications. I've never been asked for my CV. I've been doing this a long time. So,
Mm.
so we
Yeah,
probably do have a way to go.
it's hard to know. It's hard to know, but I'm agnostic as to whether or not that would
Yeah.
improve things.
The,
It could end up
yeah.
gatekeeping and being a version of elitism on a set of qualifications that aren't necessarily benchmarked appropriately. And so I
Yeah.
don't know if it would improve things, and I don't. But I just know that because it had come up, I couldn't help but wonder if you had any strong opinions in that direction.
Well, the pressures as a personal trainer are to be an entrepreneur and to be a marketer. That's what the incentives are. The incentives are not necessarily to be more professional or more scientifically
Right.
minded or better read. That's just the way the industry is. You're better rewarded for being, essentially a good marketer or looking good. So that's just
Yeah.
baked in. That's baked into the industry.
Get it. I get it. Yeah, and that's a shame when that trades off against quality, and it
Yeah,
inevitably will with regards to the opportunity costs that exist when you're trading your own time.
exactly,
It's like
exactly.
that, and you can understand it. So fair play for you to lean into the spaces that you are doing. I don't say that lightly. I know I've said that off camera, but I mean it. And it's good to be able to say that here and be able to direct anyone in our audience to your work, as well as hopefully them being able to. I think the biggest thing is any of my therapists that work anywhere near trainers, that just the opportunity for them to just lean in, like
Yeah,
especially ones that you know and respect, that you've had good
yeah,
experiences with. Yeah, do not underestimate how that ever closer union could benefit both parties, and for those sorts of things to bridge over, as well as for us to encourage any trainers that come across this, and we have an increasing amount of them, to hopefully feel that they can be a little bit braver leaning into what feel like health or medical areas such as menopause, because it is for the betterment of the clients, of which is the center of the bullseye for all parties. So again, thank you for doing what you're doing. I'm glad to be able to just amplify that slightly. Would you just direct our listeners as to where they can find out more about you?
So I probably Instagram would be the best way to find me. And what am I? Amplified_training on Instagram, or amplifiedtraining.co.uk. Those are probably the best places to find me.
Fantastic. And just remind me of exactly where it is that you're training folk at the moment, in case there are
Um,
anyone in the locality.
so I'm based in Amersham in Buckinghamshire most of the week, and I'm in London 2 days a week.
Superb. No, thank you very
Yeah,
much, mate. Really, always a pleasure to chat, and it's great to be
lovely.
able to broadcast some of it. And I'm sure as things crop up, I'm sure I'll have other things to pick your brain on over time. So maybe I'll rope you into another one sometime.
Perfect.
Cheers. Thank you, mate.
Thank you.